Blaise Pascal was. I said, well, he's probably in the top 10 most brilliant men who ever lived. You know, I don't know what to tell you. You know,
What website was that?
if I was going to have a list of the top 10 most influential people I've read in my life, he'd be in the top 3. You know, and Epictetus would be in the top 3. And, you know, anyway, I heard an interesting, and probably sidetracked. I won't get sidetracked on that. I think this is really important to realize. Models are very useful for us to use to solve problems, and some models are useful and some models aren't, but the fact is they're all wrong because they're a simplified model. Reality is the whole universe, and the whole universe is all tied together. So what do? We can't grasp the whole universe, and we need to solve problems. So we take what we think are directly related to this issue and just secondarily and tertiarily related to this main issue enough so we think it has an effect, and then we try to build a model around which we can solve this problem. Is that model correct? No, it's always wrong, because we have to leave things out. Quite often we figure out that we left out something important as we're trying to solve this problem because we went with that model and it failed. You know, people are fond of saying that according to the laws of aerodynamics, bumblebees can't fly. Well, the laws of aerodynamics are designed to design airplanes. They aren't designed to design bumblebees. It's a model. It's useful for designing airplanes. It's not true. It's not right. That's why it can't explain why bumblebees fly. But that's all right. It doesn't have to. It's not used for that. It's a model, and we use it to solve this other problem. So a lot of these models of what you know, how do I measure whether a queen is going to give me bees that are resistant to varroa, or whether or not this system I'm using is helping with varroa by counting mites. A lot of these models are wrong. Some of them might be useful, and some of them aren't useful at all. But it's real easy to get distracted.
Anyway,
that was my small cell. Does that make better sense on a small cell and natural cell and all of that?
yeah.
What else do you want to talk about?
Hive management.
Hive management. That's wide open, of course, but let's see what I can find here.
Yes, I do.
One down.
Oh, was it in there?
It was a small cell hive management presentation right there.
Oh, okay. We just talked about natural cell size. I have a page on it there, plus that presentation we just saw. There's a whole bunch about V. Lusby's work that's out on vSource. I think that's still working. vSource kind of got hacked and things got kind of scrambled. So if it doesn't work today, try back in about a week. It ought to work. It might work today. That's, of course, the organic group, which is probably why most of you are here, is you're on that organic group. But if you're not, you ought to get on there. I would not do the emails if it was me. I just do it where I can go get online and check them, and then I can, but that way I don't get my mailbox inundated by some conversation that popped up that I'm not really interested in. I can kind of skip through them and go, no, I really don't want to talk about global warming today, I'll take this. But anyway, there's some good conversations on there you want to be in on. And we've already talked about all this. I'm going to do that. I don't know, do I get into anything else here? Probably not.
For instance, Michael, during this time of year, like the bottom boxes tend to be hardly used for anything except bee bread and things like that, but most of the broods are like in the second, third box, you know. Is that first box to be kept there for when they clean it up and start laying brood, or just off, or what do you do?
What I do, if I happen to be down to the bottom board,
Box.
well, I'd be down to the bottom board if it was spring and I happened to be going through this box, because I may as well see what's going on, so I pull everything off. By the time I get to the bottom box, I may as well set it off, clean the bottom board off, put the bottom board back, now if that bottom box is empty, I might put it on top not because I think I'm doing the bees any favor, but because I can tell when it's full if I put it on the top. If I leave it on the bottom, I can't really tell when it's full. So I might put it back on the top, but I never dig all the way down just so I can take the bottom box and put it back on the top. I don't do that much. That's too much work, and I don't think it really accomplishes anything. Bees will move back down anyway if I don't get back to this hive. The idea that bees only work up is totally erroneous. I mean, it's easy enough to realize that. A swarm moves into a tree, they have to start at the top, and they have to build down. That's all they can do. They can't do anything else. So they always build down. We create the illusion that they like to build up by sticking empty boxes on top of the hive all the time. Well, you stick empty boxes on the top of the hive, that's where the space is, so they go up and they build stuff where the space is, because that's where the space is.
So if I leave that on there and come into, a spring, and then they go up, I don't have to worry about, well, they're gonna swarm because I didn't give them enough space up, then we'll go down.
Oh, they'll go down.
Okay.
You do have to worry about that you didn't give enough space, and you may have to worry that you didn't give enough space in the brood nest.
No, I know that,
But,
I do.
But yeah, but as long as I'm on the bottom, I would tend to put that on the top, because when I come back next time, I can see if they filled it up.
Gotcha.
And if it's on the bottom, I gotta dig my way back down to the bottom to see if they filled it up, and I don't wanna work that hard. So I just do it for me, I don't do it for them, they'll sort it out anyway. So I never go through my hives just purposely to get all the way to the bottom box so that I can swap it and put it on the top.
Gotcha.
I don't have the time or the energy, and the bees will work it out anyway. But here's what happens though sometimes. Let's think about this. If this bottom box is empty, their basic instincts are to store honey over the brood nest. They want to look up and see honey stored up there. That's what they want to see coming into winter, and so that's where they tend to want to store the honey. So if I don't do anything with this hive come spring yet, and this box is empty, then they'll start storing honey over the head of the queen and the brood nest, and they'll start pushing the queen down, and she'll end up in the bottom box. So what happens if before she ever gets pushed down at all, I pile a bunch of supers on? Well, they want to store the honey overhead, so they start filling the supers up, and they haven't pushed the queen down because they had room up here to store honey in the super. So they didn't really have any reason to store it in the brood nest because, there was all this extra room up here. And they feel like that extra room ought to get filled up with honey, so they're up there filling that up with honey, and now this box might just sit empty.
That's so helpful, because now I understand, that they won't have too much room down there, that's just something to manage where pests can be, or something. So that makes perfect sense, that's what I'm telling.
Yeah, you may as well if you're there. But if it's got brood in it, I wouldn't do it because I don't want to break up the brood nest. So unless it's totally empty, I'm not going to do it. Yeah.
I guess I assume as a new beekeeper that you would be inspecting for your full hive like once a week.
No. You probably should because you need to learn, but no, I don't know.
So at what point, I guess, do you not have to go down to the very bottom and keep checking all of that?
If I had the time, which I seldom do, if I had the time, I would like to hit all of them in the spring before. I might not get to them until probably first week, second week of May, and by then I could probably do a little bit of swarm prevention while I'm doing my inspection. I probably should get into them earlier, maybe. I don't know. I just don't have time. So I don't want to get into them any earlier than the middle of April, where I am, because the weather's not that warm. It's not. There's nothing really for me to see. I suppose I could see if they're queenless in April and maybe deal with that, but all in all, I'm not too worried about it until about the first or second week of May. Now we're getting into almost coming up on prime swarm season, so now I'm probably going to walk into the yard and look at them and say, which of these hives look like they might swarm, and those are probably what I'm going to look at. And then if they're not trying to swarm, the rest of them aren't trying to swarm, and I may just leave them all alone and not do anything. I may just go home. I probably won't go through all those hives. I probably won't have time. But should I? Probably, sure. Will I? Probably not.
What's the basis when you say looks like, which ones will swarm? What do you
The
look
ones that have a lot of traffic, a lot of bees,
Okay.
maybe some bearding on the front. Those are the ones that are obviously the strongest ones.
Okay.
I'm gonna look at those. If they're trying to swarm, well, I'm probably gonna look at all of them, because I don't know what they all might be doing.
What are you gonna do about it?
Well, if they're trying to swarm and they've got swarm cells already, I'm gonna split them. I'm probably gonna split them fairly aggressively. If they're a really strong hive with lots of swarm cells, I'll probably split them very aggressively. If they're just a small hive with a few swarm cells, I'll probably just split them in half. But I might split them into 4, 5, or 6 hives if it's a big, strong, booming colony.
Take them
It's got
away
lots of.
somewhere far away.
I do them all in the same yard. I've never taken them anywhere else. It's a nice theory, but it's too much work. When I started, I didn't have any other place to take them, and
And they don't go
and
back.
after 30 years of never taking them anyplace else because I didn't have any place to take them, it just seemed silly, even though I did have a place to go to that much more work.
You keep them side by side, so.
Yeah, they're all side by side. Mine are all touching each other. They're all right up against each other.
And how many are up against each other?
14. I've got an 8-foot by 4-foot stand, and they're all up against each other in both directions for the winter. And then come summer, I kind of spread them out a little this way so I can pick up the boxes better, and then come summer I shove them back together. So, yeah.
You're talking about keeping the brood nest open. How do you do that and how often?
How I do that is I usually stick empty frames in the brood nest.
How many?
Depends on how strong they are. My rule of thumb that I give to new beekeepers is if you make a gap, put that empty frame in, and it doesn't fill up with festooning bees really quickly, then you shouldn't be doing it. If it fills really quickly with festooning bees, you can stick an empty frame in there and it'll work fine. And that really booming hive might be 3 or 4 of them, and so-so hive might be 1. So it kind of depends. It's also a good way to get really good straight drawn comb. Anytime you stick an empty frame between 2 good straight combs, you're going to get a good straight comb. So now, I highly recommend it be an absolutely empty frame. The next best thing would be foundation. The worst thing would be drawn comb. You stick drawn comb in the middle of a brood nest in swarm season, and they just immediately backfill it with nectar because it's deep enough to put nectar in. If you put a foundationless in there, they immediately start to draw it, and as soon as it's even just a little bit of a cell wall, the queen will lay in there. As soon as the queen lays in there, then it's an egg, and it's not going to be nectar, and so you'll get a whole frame of brood that way. Where if you stick an empty drawn comb in there, you'll end up with a frame of honey in the middle of the brood nest instead of a frame of brood in the middle of the brood nest. So what you're doing is here's the sequence of events for a swarm. The bees decide they want to swarm, they start backfilling the brood nest. So, and sometimes it works the other way around. I mean, the cause and effect gets complicated when you're talking about a colony of bees because, as we said before, a lot of times this bee's picking up where the other bee left off, so they don't always understand the difference between we're doing this on purpose or it just happened, and and then all the bees are assuming somebody's doing it on purpose. So, in other words, the brood nest can get backfilled unintentionally by the bees because they just ran out of space, and all the returning bees start filling the brood nest up with nectar. But if they had enough supers, then they'd be putting it up in the supers unless they actually want to swarm. Then they're purposely putting it in the brood nest. So either way, if it starts getting full of nectar, then the queen has nowhere to lay. If the queen has nowhere to lay, she starts losing weight. I don't think the bees really have the right or the power to refuse to feed her. People often say they don't feed the queen as much, and therefore she doesn't lay as much, and then she loses weight. Well, they don't feed the queen as much because she doesn't ask for it. The reason she doesn't ask for it is she's not laying eggs because she has nowhere to lay them. If she has nowhere to lay them, then she doesn't eat as much food. She doesn't ask for as much food. Her ovaries start shrinking down. Her ovarioles start shrinking down. She gets smaller, and which is what she's going to have to do to be able to fly so she can swarm. The brood nest is getting backfilled, so all the emerging new bees, all these young workers that are emerging don't have a job. They're unemployed. Because normally their job would be to go feed some other brood, but there's no brood to feed because it all got backfilled. The queen doesn't have anywhere to lay, so there's no brood for them to feed, so now they're unemployed. So all these unemployed nurse bees build up to some critical mass, and they start making a funny kind of warble sound. If you listen to a hive that's about to swarm, you might get to hear that. If you put an observation hive in your living room and let them swarm, you'll definitely get to hear that. So now they're making this kind of a warble sound. Somebody actually invented a little electronic device that'll pick up this warble and tell you that they're about to swarm. It's called an apiductor. So now these unemployed nurse bees, they'll hold a few queen cells. The queen will lay some eggs, and as soon as the first one of those queen cells gets capped, the queen, and half of these bees usually will take off and start a new colony, right? So what happens when I stick an empty frame in the middle of this sequence of events? I put an empty frame in the middle of the brood nest, the bees start growing comb, the queen starts laying in it, now all these nurse bees that weren't already employed drawing wax, because I employed a bunch of them drawing wax, the rest of them who are still unemployed start taking care of this brood. And so now they're employed taking care of broods. Now I've set the sequence of events in the other direction. I've employed the nurse bees in drawing wax and employed them in taking care of brood. Now, they still may start heading back the other direction again. I may have to do that more than once. I might have to do it twice. I might have to do it 3 times. But I hardly ever get it done more than twice. I usually don't get it done more than once. If I try and hit them about a week or 2 before prime swarm season and open up the brood nest, I might be able to avoid this whole sequence of events, and then they don't try to swarm. That's the plan. And the really booming ones, I might have to do them twice. A lot of this comes back to, with practice, here's what you should do every time you approach a hive. You're looking at this hive. If you want to do this, like write notes, you can write notes. But at least in your mind, think about, what is it I expect to find in here? Do I think this hive's about to swarm? Do I think it's really booming? It's got a lot of brood? What am I expecting to find when I open this hive? Think that all through. And if you're thinking, I think they're about to swarm, or I think they're whatever, then open it up and see what you find. Because here's what you do. You go through this mental process, you come to some conclusions, and then you get feedback on your conclusions when you open it up. And eventually, by going through that mental process and then getting the feedback, you start to get where you can tell what they're doing. You start to get where you stand in front of a hive and you go, I think they're about to swarm, and now you're right. You didn't used to be right, but you got feedback enough times that you started to get where you could tell the difference. But if you don't go through that mental process before you open the hive of what you expect to find, then you'll never get to that point where you can look at it and know what's going to happen. Does that make sense? That comes back to learning, but yeah.
So let's say you've got a relatively strong hive, you're going through an inspection, and you come across the queen. At that point, you decide you're going to split it for whatever reason. Is it better to put the queen in a new box and give her some resources, relatively less resource? Or is it better to take some resources and have the new box raise, to take some egg and have...
If I know where the queen is, I put the new queen in the new place. And part of that is because in order to raise a good queen, she needs to be well-fed. And in order to get her well-fed, you really need a lot of bees. And at the old location, there's going to be plenty of bees. There's going to be plenty of resources. The queen's going to get well-fed. And you've kind of simulated what happens in a swarm. You've taken the old queen and she started a new colony, and now they're just going to raise a new one and go on. So if I knew where she was, that's probably what I would do. But I would never bother to find her. I just split it. But because I don't have time. I go into the yard and I'm going to split it. I don't have time to find all the queens. It takes too long. But if I saw her, yeah, I'd put her in the new place.
So Michael, what do you do with the frames with the swarm cells on them?
I take every frame that's got a swarm cell on it. I usually put it in its own nuke. But I have a lot of nuke boxes around. If you don't have a lot of nuke boxes around, you have to decide how you want to do that. But I'll take a frame of brood and a frame of honey and put it in a nuke box and a shake of bees from a brood frame. And don't ever shake bees off of a frame with queen cells on it because it's hard on the queens. But a shake of brood in there, and now that's usually enough. They'll hatch that queen and get her bred, and then I'll have another queen. But I want queens. So there's this theory that if you do that with swarm cells, you're going to raise swarmy bees. But I think there are swarmy bees, and you probably don't want to breed from swarmy bees. But to me, swarmy bees aren't bees that want to swarm under normal swarming circumstances. Swarmy bees are bees that want to swarm for no good reason when they shouldn't be. That's kind of a different scenario. When you have bees that they're not that strong, or it's the middle of a drought, or it's circumstances under which it's just foolish for them to be swarming, those are swarmy bees, and I probably don't want to raise queens from those. But a hive in prime swarm season that's trying to swarm is just trying to reproduce. That's just what bees do. So I love those queens. They're usually well fed. There's usually plenty of drones for them to mate with. Makes an excellent queen.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
There's this unique situation about what's going on in her hive. They use it for apitherapy, and so they're constantly going in this hive. And it really takes its toll on the bees, And so Now, there's no brood in this hive, and there's, I thought it was a laying worker because there's all this drone brood. There's queen cells. How can it possibly be a queen if it's got no brood in it?
Any laying worker hive in the early stages will make queen cells, and any drone laying queen hive will make queen cells. They have their own eggs in them unless they're D's bees, and they might have queens in them.
So that it can't possibly happen successfully this way. You
I
have
wouldn't
to
say it can't possibly happen. It does happen sometimes. Sometimes they do manage to raise a queen. D's bees manage to raise queens most of the time.
without any brood in the hive.
Yeah, but these bees are different. Your bees probably
Trust me, I
won't,
know.
but they
He
have.
is different.
No, but your bees, it's possible they could succeed, but the odds are really, really low. So,
Can we
you're probably
jam
gonna
a lot of brood and nurse bees in that hive?
I mean, if you want to set a hive right, you don't know what's wrong. If you give them a frame of eggs and brood every week for 3 weeks, it'll probably set them right. The brood pheromones will suppress any laying workers, and then they'll figure out that they've got eggs. If you catch them at the point where they still have those queen cells, they'll probably just raise a queen from the workers' eggs you give them. But if they get past that point, then they won't, and it may take you a week or two of open brood to suppress the laying workers enough. They will. But in 3 weeks of open brood, they'll start raising a queen almost every time.
Thanks.
So if you take a frame of open brood and eggs from another hive and put it in there every week for 3 weeks, those brood pheromones will suppress any laying workers. And if they've got a drone laying queen, odds are in 3 weeks they'll figure that out and that they could raise a new queen and they'll do it. But I won't guarantee that. If you can find that drone laying queen and kill her, you'll up the odds. But if that's what you got.
When does your cold weather come for you?
Oh, we usually get a hard freeze by October. Sometimes it's not till December, but sometimes it's in September. So,
Just trying to figure out what the season is.
but I'd say our typical winter is from October till the first fruit trees are going to bloom April the 15th usually, but we might get a snow on May the 1st and a frost on May the 15th, and it's hard to say. Yeah.
I'm wanting to take my brood boxes and make all my medium boxes. What's the best way to do that?
I'm sorry, I can't.
To change from deep brood
Oh, you
boxes?
can change from deeps to mediums. The first thing you do is don't buy any more deeps. Every time you see a deep frame that's empty, pull it out. And then fill it with a medium if you have no other way to do it. But you can juggle things between multiple hives. So let's say I pull all of the empty, because like right about now, as soon as it's warm enough to get in there, there'll be a lot of empty frames. You pull all the empty frames out of all of your hives. You can take some of the full ones and consolidate them into one of them possibly, or whatever, or you can fill them in with every other one with mediums in the deep box, and they'll build this much foam on the bottom. But you can cut it off later and rubber band it into frames. But if you can get enough out to get a whole box worth out, then you can get that down more. You can also, if you only have 3 or 4 deep frames, you can put them in 2 mediums and fill the rest of the mediums, top and bottom out with medium frames, and they'll build about this much on the bottom of the deeps. You can also put all the deeps up above queen excluder and wait for all the brood to emerge, and then take them off. And there's all sorts of things you can do. I would do all of them that seem reasonable at the time.
If I had one that just started last fall, it was in our nursery for the winter, it was a deep. Could I just start putting mediums,
Sure.
stuff like that?
So if you just had some mediums on, once the brood nest is moved up to the medium, stick an excluder on to keep the queen out of the deep. And after all the broods emerge in the deep, you can pull it in.
Hey, Michael, can you use the microphone, please? It's hard to hear back here. Thank you.
Sorry.
Put the microphone right in front.
My legs get tired.
Why don't you put the mic while you're sitting down?
Yeah, just hold it while you're sitting.
Yeah.
It just,
I
we
can
just
just hold
couldn't
it.
hear you. Thank you, and we
Okay.
wanted to.
Shall we do issues, or somebody's got another question? We're gonna do. And this will cover a lot of those things we already covered too, This is my first rule of beekeeping. What to do if you're freaked out? This is a quote from Richard Taylor. There are a few rules of thumb that are useful guides. One is that when you're confronted with some problem in the apiary and you do not know what it is, then do nothing. Matters are seldom made worse by doing nothing, and are often made worse by inept intervention. I just did a page I call the hardest thing in beekeeping on my website that I put out there about a month ago, I think, because I keep running into this. The primary error in logic that the Greeks defined was post hoc ergo propter hoc, and that means after this because of this, and that's, I agree, is an error in logic, but I think that's the secondary error in logic. I think the primary error in logic that human beings fall into most often is we have to do something even if it's wrong. Because usually doing something even if it's wrong is usually wrong. You probably should have been doing nothing, and that was the right thing to do, but you just can't bring yourself to do it because you have this innate fear of loss that if I don't do something, I'm going to lose something. Well, odds are you were either going to lose it or not lose it anyway. You know, Voltaire, who was a famous physician in his day, said the job of a physician is to entertain the patient while nature does the work. And I think you need to realize that with your bees, most things fall into one of two categories. It's kind of the same as when you get sick. You're either going to get well or you're not. The rest of it's pretty much just you doing something because you think you have to. It's the same with your bees. Odds are they're probably going to be fine or they're going to die, and it probably doesn't matter what you do. I'm amazed how many people get so wound up on the little things. The little things are things we have decisions on, and we get to make them, and so I guess we take them really seriously. But if you put bees in a wax-coated cardboard box, they will probably do just as well as if you put them in a Worry hive or a top bar hive or a Langstroth hive or whatever, any kind of hive, or a sun hive, or a, take your pick. Because you know what? Bees just want a little cavity that they can build their little home in. As long as they got a hole big enough that they can come and go pretty well and small enough they can guard it, they're happy. And they'll thrive and they'll do fine. But we tend to get obsessed over little things, and quite often those obsessions over little things cause us to panic, and we think, you know, oh my gosh, there's too many drone cells in my hive, so I got to do something. Or there's a bunch of queen cells, so I got to destroy them all. Or, you know, whatever it is. And odds are you'll do that and then you'll regret it later. I don't know how many times on the bee forums I've seen somebody post, oh my gosh, I opened up my hive and there were 4 queen cells and I destroyed them all. Now what do I do? Well, you're a little late asking the question. You already made them hopelessly queenless, so I'm not sure what to tell you. This is one of the things people panic on. I get this every October on all of the bee forums. It's like, I don't have a queen. I'm queenless. And it's October. And you go, it's October and you're in Ohio. Why do you think you're queenless? Well, there's no eggs and there's no brood. Well, of course there's no eggs and no brood. It's October. But my other hive has eggs and brood. Well, every colony makes its own decisions. This colony decided it was time to shut down, and this colony hasn't made that decision yet. You know, you have 5 kids. They don't all make the same decisions under the same circumstances because they have a mind of their own. And every one of those colonies has a mind of its own. And it's going to make its decision based on whatever it thinks is the proper criteria. And that may or may not be what you think is the proper criteria. But so no eggs and no brood doesn't mean there's necessarily no queen. It could easily mean there's some reason that the queen shut down. She might shut down in the middle of a dirt because there's just nothing coming in. Some bees are more frugal than others. Most of the Italians in this country have been bred to just raise brood like crazy all the time because the guys who want to pollinate the almonds and the guys who want to sell packages, it works out really well for them if they brood up really early and raise tons of bees, even though there's not going to be enough nectar to feed all those mouths. That's exactly what they want. But the frugal bees, the feral bees you go get, the Carniolans, the Caucasians, the Russians, they all tend to shut down in the dirt. They go, you know what, we don't need more mouths to feed right now. What we need is to bide our time and wait and see what happens. And so they'll make more cautious decisions where the Italians will just raise brood all the time. But they bred them to raise brood all the time because it works out well when you're selling packages if they raise brood all the time. It works out well if you want to have 3 frames of brood in a hive to take to the almonds in February if they raise a lot of brood for long times. So if you've got more frugal bees, they may just shut down. If the other reasons you might not see any eggs or brood is they might have swarmed and the new queen isn't laying yet. They might have superseded the queen and the old queen's now died and or you accidentally squished the old queen and they raised a new queen and that version isn't laying yet. So before you panic and assume they don't have a queen, you probably want to look at the situation a little more. I made this mistake and I don't know, maybe everybody has to make it themselves, so maybe I'm just wasting my time trying to explain it to you. But I found no eggs, no brood. I bought a queen, put her in there, they killed her. I bought another queen, put her in there, they killed her. I bought another queen, put her in there. Well, I went to put her in there, except then I saw eggs and brood, and I went, oh, wait a minute. There's a queen in there. Where did this queen come from? Well, she was probably there all along. She just wasn't laying yet. It takes 2 weeks from when she emerged to when she's finally laying, and if you try to find a virgin queen, if you can find a virgin queen in a full-size hive, you're really good at finding queens. They hide, they run, they're flighty, they don't act like regular queens. The simplest solution, if you suspect they're queenless, is just give them a frame of eggs and brood every week for 3 weeks. Whatever the problem is, you'll probably fix it. Odds are you'll fix it in 1 week. If you put it in there and come back in a week and they've got queen cells in there, then you're done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. There's this panic that there's too many drones. Well, the amount of drones in a hive varies a lot. I don't know why Dan Brown's, what was his first one? The Da Vinci Code, yeah. He has something in there on the golden mean, and somewhere in there it says that the number of drones to workers in a hive is the golden mean. Well, that's not true. That's just plain not true. The number of drones to workers in a hive changes throughout the season. It's not a constant ratio at all. In the fall, all the way through the winter, it's usually none. It might be a few. I find with the feral bees, there'll be 2 or 3 drones in about every hive, but that's about it. With the Italians, the domestic Italians, there's no drones in the hives. But come the peak of prime swarm season, there may be 20% drones in the hive. That means 1 in 5 of those is a drone. But then it'll start dropping off for the summer, and by the middle of summer, it'll be down to maybe 1 in 10. Maybe it'll be 10%. And by the time you get to if you hit a dearth in the summer, they'll just kill them all. There won't be any all of a sudden. So the number of drones in a hive varies a lot throughout the year. Anytime you find 100% of the capped worker brood, or the capped brood in your hive is drone, 100% of it, then you got a problem. If it's not 100% of it, you're probably doing fine. It's just that they're raising a lot of drones. But if you got a lot of capped worker in there along with a lot of capped drones, you're fine. If you have 100%, then it's probably because you got a drone laying queen or you've got laying workers. Let's talk a little briefly about how to tell the difference. A late mated queen will become a drone layer, and Dee will disagree with me on some of this stuff, but I'm basing this on my own experience and on Huber's research, but basically if she doesn't mate in the first 21 days, she ends up being a drone layer. So if you have really bad